Today, I want to compare the stylistic and story writing choices made for the Mahabharata versus the Game of Thrones by George R. Martin. The reason I'm doing that is because the story that George R. Martin told with the Game of Thrones is more ambiguous. There are outcomes which are unpredictable. Which side is going to win is not known until towards the end of the show. Though you know that the good people will win and the bad people will lose, the good versus bad, it's very unlikely that mainstream story will select the victory of evil over good. But in general, the outcome of the story is not known until somewhere towards the end. While on the other hand, there are some choices made in the Mahabharata which foreshadow an outcome from the beginning, and it detracts from the story, in my opinion. It makes the story weaker that those choices were made. For example, the first thing that foreshadows the outcome is that one side is called the Kauravas and the other side is called Pandavas. And on the Kaurava side, the main two characters, they are called Duryodhan and Dushasan. In Sanskrit, the prefix du means evil, misfortune, all sorts of negative things. Other examples of words which start with du or dur, durgati, which means misfortune, and dukh, which means sadness or suffering. Now, the main two characters on the Kaurava side are called Duryodhan, which means a yodha, a warrior who fights the wrong way, and Dushasan, which means someone who does not have self control. Now, when characters are given names like that from the get go, it's very obvious that these are the characters you should not be identifying with. And I don't think that's right for a story. A story should take the reader on a journey that you believe in someone for whatever they are, and over time, either their character evolves to become a positive character or a negative character. But the names should not be foreshadowing that. Compare that with the names used in the Game of Thrones. Almost none of the names in the Game of Thrones are unique. Most of them are names you can probably hear on other shows, though they're spelled a little differently. For example, Joffrey is spelled Joffrey, and Peter is spelled Petyr. So these are mainstream regular names which don't carry any connotations with them. And if the name was something like Adolf for Adolf Hitler, or the name was Hannibal for a character, then you sort of already imagine that, okay, this person is going to have certain negative traits which I should watch out for, and I should take everything he or she does with a grain of salt. So that way, I think the Game of Thrones makes better choices of names than the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata makes it very obvious. You don't need to ever even think about supporting the characters whose names are starting with the prefix du. It's almost like you made sure that once one team was wearing black, the other team was wearing white, and you always know that the white is going to win. The white team is going to win. So that way, I think the Game of Thrones makes better stylistic choices than the Mahabharata. The second thing is that in the Mahabharata, there are no minor characters. Or the story is told only through the lens of big characters. There are a few minor characters who are introduced. One of them is Sanjaya, who is the narrator of the Mahabharata to Duryodhan's father, because Duryodhan's father is blind and Sanjaya is narrating the happenings on the battlefield to Duryodhan. But otherwise, and there are two other characters, Karna and Eklavya. But otherwise, there are no minor characters. There are no characters who are commoners who are part of the story and who move the story forward. Even Karna is shown to be a person, an illegitimate son born to royalty. And Eklavya, like we discussed in the other video, he is shown to be a great archer, a very capable archer, almost as good as Arjun, but then his thumb is cut off immediately by by Dronacharya, which means that he cannot actually take the part of an archer. He cannot fight on behalf of anyone as an archer, and his livelihood is taken away from him. So it's a little bit unfortunate that the Mahabharata has no small characters, no minor characters whom we can feel connected with and say, oh, this could be me. I could have been that Eklavya character who had to choose between fighting for Pandavas, who were the people in exile, versus the Kauravas, who were currently my kings. So that fight that mental stress and the decision making could have been heightened up in in the Mahabharata. Game of Thrones, on the other hand, has a whole range of very, very important small characters. Let's go over them one by one. First, there is a character called Varys, who is a eunuch in charge of the spy network of the kingdom of Westeros. He is from the other side. He's not even from the kingdom of the continent of Westeros. He's from outside, but he makes his way into the small council of the king of Westeros, Robert Baratheon, and he continues there. He's trusted as the master of whisperers, master of whispers, which is the name given to the spy network by the succeeding kings. And I think that's a great example of a person who's the voice of the common man, interacting and rubbing shoulders with the rich and powerful. Similarly, there are two prostitutes who prostitution right there implies the lowest of the low, at least in a country, in a medieval sounding country and continent like Westeros. But they're still important people, Roz and Shay. Roz, she's a prostitute, and she's a lot of powerful people find her very, very beautiful. Littlefinger, Peter Baelish, takes her into his brothel. Then Varys sort of wins her over to his side and uses her to spy on Peter Baelish. Similarly, Shay falls in love with Tyrion Lannister, who's one of the scions of the House of Lannister, House Lannister, and eventually she betrays him. And a lot of the story moves forward because of characters like Shay and Roz. And finally, there is a person a fighter called Bronn, Sir Bronn, who is a no-name fighter when he's first introduced in the show. He's just some guy standing in the background of a trial being held at the Vale, and he steps forward to fight on behalf of Tyrion Lannister. And from there, he makes his way all the way up to becoming a knight himself, knighted and given rich rewards for the work he does through his wit and ability to read the room and read the moment. So those are characters we can feel connected with as individuals. We are not the kings of big houses or anything like that, but we can see ourselves in people like Varys or Bronn, Sir Bronn, or Ross and Shay, and they represent our voices in these stories. But the Mahabharata has nobody like that. All the characters are larger than life, huge characters. We can't really identify with them. They don't speak our language. They don't speak to our problems. None of those things happen. And finally, we have one more stylistic choice which I need to talk about. In the Mahabharata, very early on, it's understood that God is on the side of Pandavas. Even before the main climatic battle, God is choosing his side. He says, I'm going to be the charioteer of the main warrior on the Pandava side, which is very clear to us as readers that yes, what's going to happen is that Lord Krishna, Vishnu in the form of Krishna, is going to support the Pandavas, and you can't expect God to lose. So it's understood that the Pandavas are going to win the battle of Mahabharata. There's no doubt about it. And that is a little unfortunate. Compare that with the Game of Thrones. In the Game of Thrones also, there is the God of Light who is fighting against the Night King. And he does use one specific character as his instrument, Stannis Baratheon, as his instrument to defeat the Lord of Light. Lord of Darkness. But other than that, he doesn't involve himself. This God of Light does not involve himself in the matters of men. Stannis might use the fact that he's the instrument of the God of Light to rally his troops and make himself feel stronger and all those things. But that does not mean that the actual people on the ground, the people fighting those battles for him or against him, have any less of a chance to defeat him. In fact, it happens in the Game of Thrones that during the Blackwater Battle of Blackwater Bay, Stannis Baratheon is defeated by Tyrion Lannister because of some strategic choices he makes. So this clearly means that though God is on the side of Stannis Baratheon, he's only on the side of Stannis Baratheon as far as it takes to, depending on what it takes to beat the Night King. He's not going to involve himself in the matters of men and the fights between the seven kingdoms of Westeros. So I think that is a stylistic choice which Game of Thrones makes, which makes it really interesting. So the reader never knows until the end who's going to finally win the Game of Thrones. And if from the beginning, if the God was on the side of Stannis Baratheon and you knew that the God was infallible, then it would just be that, okay, Stannis Baratheon is going to win. And from the second book onwards, you'd know exactly that there's no chance that anybody but Stannis Baratheon is going to win. And in the end, it does happen. That somebody other than Stannis Baratheon wins. And I think that is a fantastic way to keep the interest alive. Because if you foreshadow so much that which side is going to win, then the story sort of loses its luster, and we start getting bored. I mean, as a reader, if the Mahabharata was released today as a novel, we wouldn't find it very interesting because, yeah, we know from the beginning God is on the side of one team, so clearly that team is going to win, and there's the other team's going to lose whatever happens. Even if they have the best army and they even if they have God's army at their disposal, they're still going to win. The other guys are still going to win. So I think those stylistic choices make the Game of Thrones a far more compelling story to read than the Mahabharata. Which is not to say the Mahabharata is not important. I mean, of course, it's important as an epic and as a with some of the core teachings of Hinduism. But the rest of it, the story part of it, I don't think it's that interesting or that immersive a story as the Game of Thrones is. And I'd love to hear your opinions. This is my second video I'm posting about the Mahabharata and stylistically analyzing the Mahabharata. I'd love to hear what you guys want to say about it, like, because you're the people who read stories, who watch movies. You're the people whose choices might be different from mine, so and opinions might be different from mine. I'd love to hear what you feel. So please do post it in your comments and let me know what you think, because that's what's going to make this conversation a little richer and help us as Indians tell better stories to each other. All right, that's pretty much it for today.